On today's episode of the Going Commando Podcast, we break down the disappointing loss in the Meadowlands to the New York Giants. And it's been a while since y'all have heard from us, so we're going to break down everything in regards to this team, players, front office, coaching staff through the first third of this season, and then we'll finish up with some free agent goats and stats. So stick around, stay tuned, and let's get started. Welcome to Going Commando, a Washington Commanders podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Going Commando podcast. My name is Clark, accompanied by Tom and Chris, my co-hosts, of course, and we are coming to you live after what was not exactly a game that we want to be talking about. It was Week 7 against the New York Giants. They lost 14-7. Our first episode for everybody in a while. The team now sits at 3-4, and we've got a lot to talk about. Let's just keep that in and of itself. So I'll toss it off to you guys first for our initial reactions to the loss to set us to 3-4, and only a game behind the Giants for last place in the division.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard when you have these kinds of losses because you're trying to look for a positive to take out of it. And I think if there was any positive, it was the way that Chase Young played today. Sort of started to look like his old self. And you question what you can do better next time. And I think all of us can agree that there's quite a few things that we can do better. That especially being how not taking as many sacks, and we'll probably get into that a little bit more in depth. But yeah, just overall, a bit of a disappointment. We had a chance to win it there in the end, and maybe it's youth, maybe it's inexperience, or maybe it's just unlucky, plain and simple. But Dotson doesn't come down with that ball, and we don't get a chance to score a touchdown. So just feeling a little burnt, but otherwise, I'm still feeling not terrible about the team. 3-4 is not a terrible place to work up from. So
Yeah, I mean, I think our record at this point almost is better than this team has shown me that we are. I mean, I think that this most recent game today was arguably Howe's worst game. He needs to be getting rid of that ball better, and I know a lot of it is due to the fact that the O-line is just letting absolutely everyone and anything through. But he's got to do a better job of getting rid of that ball as well. There's fault all across the board here. We can't make adjustments again. We just continue to see this coaching staff not be able to make adjustments when we need to make them. And just kind of playing flat football. There's no urgency that I saw today. Let's be a little bit more high tempo. Show that we're playing from behind this whole game, and it felt like we were playing like we were ahead and just trying to just tie or something like that. I mean, very disappointing performance, and I think overall I've had to, especially since that Bears game, I've had to reset my expectations for the season a little bit, which is fine. Very accustomed and familiar to doing that, but overall, there's just a lot of problems I think that we've seen that this team has over the first third of the season here. Some of which I think we anticipated going into the season, some of which we didn't maybe see coming or know the severity level. So again, there's a lot of season still left, but not the most promising outlook so far, I'd say.
Well, one thing to note was there were several injuries, specifically on the defensive side of the ball in the game today, notably Cody Barton going down very early in the game. And we were, once again, as Washington Commanders fans, blessed with the presence of David Mayo backing up the defensive line. And what a ride that was today. As obviously Darren Waller was able to get some good looks in coverage. And their run game was effective at times when it needed to be. So that even on top of everything else going on with the offensive line, really contributed to this loss.
That is definitely alarming, to say the least. Also, I believe Sadiq Charles was banged up at one point on that play, like later in the game. I know Curtis Samuel was checked out at one point. So definitely some guys taking some lumps. That's definitely not going to help us either. Saw a couple of our players really just did not come out and seem like they were ready to play today. Particularly St. Juice. I think he got beat on a lot of plays today and just did not. I think he had a couple good pass breakups, maybe one or two, but I did not think he looked like his normal self. And then again, as you mentioned, Cody Barton going down. Let's hope that that's not, maybe as that's not serious. As hard as we may have already been on Cody Barton so far this season in terms of his play. Having David Mayo as your starting Mike linebacker moving forward does scare the hell out of me.
Yeah, and you make a really good point there about players not seeming like they came out there to play. One of the players that I really can think of that ultimately, when you look back at the film, might have cost us the most was Jamin Davis. He's a guy that I think works very well against the run, and he's a good linebacker overall. But there was a play earlier in the game where I believe Saquon breaks off what is about a 22-yard reception from basically the line of scrimmage to the end zone. And you just see him, his feet are flat. He's not ready to play pass. And he lets him right by. He gets shrugged off trying to make what is ultimately a very inefficient and unlikely tackle. But overall, I mean, I will say that this defense did seem to pick it up in the second half. The Darren Waller touchdown was obviously something that was a little bit disheartening of sorts because, that Darren Waller, when he is hot, he's a guy that can do this sort of thing where, I believe he ended with almost 100 yards receiving, and he got a majority of the catches that I can remember. And he really just looked good in this game today. That being said, absolutely, the secondary is a point where we are slightly hindered. St. Juice didn't look great. I don't believe we had our first round pick this year playing back there, who I'm trying not to say his name because I'm going to get very angry with the way he's been playing and the DJ Moore game, which we'll go over later on. But he's just been playing relatively lackluster, and it hurts even more because today we did get to see a guy who we could have taken and a guy who was somewhat of a hometown guy in Deontay Banks from the University of Maryland get an interception earlier in the game. So, pardon me, later in the game. So it's hard, but I feel like the defense really did find a switch that they flipped in that second half.
So now to look ahead at the Commanders' schedule, we are hosting the Philadelphia Eagles in what the team is billing as a sellout. Now, with how the team has been playing recently, it's, anyone's say as to, what color is going to be filled the majority of those seats in that stadium. But now with the team at 3-4, having played the Eagles earlier in the season and, having played them all the way to an overtime game, very competitive football game, since that moment, the team has severely underperformed for the expectations that were placed on them since that moment. So, with the team now a game under 500, we have another divisional matchup against a good opponent. Do you think this team is going to be able to respond?
Fortunately, I'm a little hesitant to say that we will. I mean, I think you just kind of look at, I think a good catalyst to kind of looking at how well our team is doing is honestly how well Terry McLaurin is doing. I mean, I think that this is clearly the worst year that he's had. I mean, I think he sits right now on the year, after through 7 games, 342 yards. You can't have your number one receiver having less than 350 yards through 7 games, only 1 touchdown. Like what? I just don't understand what Bieniemy's doing. I think we really need to take a hard look at whether or not we think what he's doing has been efficient and actually helpful to us or not. I think we got to really reevaluate, the whole coaching staff, whether that's, happens now. I don't think that happens mid-season, regardless of what happens. I think that happens during the off season, but I'm not confident, really moving forward in this season, especially against our divisional opponents, who I think are very competitive teams. We saw that today. Even the Giants, no matter how bad they may play against other teams, or even against us, we still just can't find a way to get it done against these teams that we should beat. So I'm not confident, unfortunately. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I sadly have to agree with Chris here. I mean, we have a very tough schedule coming up even after that Eagles game. We obviously play the Patriots, the Seahawks, the New York Giants again, the Cowboys twice, the Miami Dolphins, who are looking like world beaters at this point. So it's going to be tough sledding. I will say that the last game against the Eagles, let me say, not this Giants game. The last game against the Eagles gave me a lot of hope for this team looking forward, and they've kind of been, as we've said, shaky since then. And it's hard to point out exactly where the issue is. I mean, there's times where our defense just doesn't look amazing. And then there's times where our offense just can't seem to get its foot out of its own mouth. And just, it's hard for us to look forward with hope. But I think that ultimately, if we're going to be a good team and if people are going to keep their jobs, which it seems like it's that kind of year, we're going to have to start performing. And that's not to say that we can't beat these teams. It's just to say that it's looking more unlikely with each passing game. So, as for the coaching reevaluations, I do sort of stay with Chris here in believing that no one really gets moved in the middle of the season. It's not really prudent. I mean, if you're trying to figure out whether Bieniemy is the guy for you after Rivera is removed, I would just look towards games like today where our offense didn't put up many points, and it's not like this is the first game where we've been held to single digits. I mean, we played the Bills earlier in the season and we were held to only 3 points, and there are some problems with the offense and the play calling that I do see, and um, it's just a rut that we have to pull ourselves out of. And hopefully we're able as a team to unite and pull ourselves out of this hole and stop digging ourselves deeper.
Yeah, I mean, uh, overall, I think penalties. I don't know the exact statistic or positioning of us in relation to the rest of the league right now in this, but I would not be surprised if our O line is definitely among the top most penalized in the league. You consistently just today, and it's not only just today, but in games, so far this season, you consistently see us getting critical penalties that just, eliminate any forward progress that we've made, kill drives. You see Charles Leno and Andrew Wiley as the primary culprits, and in my opinion as well. Nick Gates has been also shaky to date, I would say as well. Really, the whole O line, apart from Cosme, I think has really been heavily penalized, and just really been, Swiss cheese, for lack of a better term, this year. They really did not do a great job of addressing that positional group this offseason. It's something that I think Ron has proven he's incapable of properly addressing during the time that he's here. And I think a lot of our issues stem from that. Obviously, there's a lot of complementary roles, both offensively and defensively, that we could be doing a lot better in. But I think the Giants, yeah, sure, they had a decent defensive, attack today. They have some okay players on defense, decent players on defense, but they're nothing special. We shouldn't have been collapsing like that. I think at one point I saw in the game, I guess there was 15. Sam had taken 15 dropbacks, and he had been pressured on every single one. So, we're not having any time to throw. We're not having any time to let plays develop, let our receivers get downfield. It's just an overall mess for Sam, his development. and the offense. So it makes it really hard to tell even where the problem is. Is it in the play calling? Is it in the talent of the players we're putting on the field? And it's frustrating because I think that not being able to even really pinpoint the exact issue sometimes is why we continue to see these problems week to week.
So no, I kind of want to look at this, kind of break this down into segments. We're roughly a third of the way done with the season, just a little bit over with 7 games and an 18 game schedule, or 18-week schedule rather. With that being said, talking about Sam Howell, talking about this offensive line, not really being able to see if what he can give you at times, but as we know, and as we have seen, a lot of these sacks are falling on Sam Howell. So I guess kind of a third of the way through the season, let's analyze some of these position groups and players and how they've done for our team thus far. So I guess starting with that, we can talk about, do we think Sam Howell has shown enough thus far, or what is it going to take for him to potentially, in the eyes of us fans and the team, earn a starting job going forward?
I mean, yeah, it's hard to say whether or not he's going to be our guy going forward, and it's mainly because he seems to be making a lot of mistakes. Now, I'll grant him that it's rookie mistakes. There are times where you'll see him just hold on to the ball and run around and hope that a play opens up. When honestly, it's probably more reasonable and logical for him to just give up on the play and move on. Look for the next, defensive coverage. Look for something different. Maybe just take the loss of the down without losing the yards. That being said, I mean, a lot of these sacks aren't necessarily his fault sometimes. Our offensive line has looked like Swiss cheese, and he has looked like a good quarterback at times, and he's made these throws that make you think that he's a guy that can elevate at least the team moving forward, if not himself as well. Um, but it's hard. I mean, he makes a lot of young rookie sort of easily fixable mistakes through proper coaching. And to some extent, I believe that it's the enemy's fault for calling so many passing plays. I mean, we've got 2 running backs who are starting caliber running backs as far as we're concerned. I mean, I'm sure a lot of other teams would be happy to have them on the depth chart. And yet our leading rusher has maybe 300 yards and probably 3 TDs. So it's just disappointing. I mean, there's times in the game today where I was basically screaming at my television and at my phone for parts of it to, just run the ball. Like, let's see what we can do with our running game. Let's try and take some pressure off of Hal. Let's not have him throw 30, 40, 50 passes in one game. Let's try and diversify our offense beyond, just a passing offense that sometimes looks to the run. So I feel like Sam Howell is definitely a guy that, given the right opportunity, can learn and become a great quarterback. Uh, but whether that's truly going to happen for him in the future is up in the air. So I still have confidence in him. It's maybe the coaching staff that's causing me to lack more than I already do have.
Yeah, I agree. Sam Howell is still the guy. Turning to Jacoby Brissett at this point is really, truly, I think, throwing in the towel. No knock on Jacoby Brissett. It's just kind of throwing the towel in on Sam, and maybe the season. Um, Sam, we've seen a trend of him consistently not being able to get rid of the ball or throw away the ball when he should be, and just holding on to it and taking too many sacks. That's a trend we continue to see. Another which he needs to correct to really, be taken seriously as a clear frontline starter in this league. And then another thing that I don't know if we've seen as much over this season, but it's particularly today, he needs to be putting a little bit more zip on his balls. He needs to be getting them to his receivers faster. Too many times do I feel like he's lofting the ball and it puts it in a vulnerable spot to be picked off, or he's really our receivers are having to go up and really just kind of sit there as the ball's coming to them and go up and try and like fight for it. He needs to do a better job with ball placement. And again, we saw that, Jahan should have had that at the end of the game. Admittedly, I think he's still a ball you should be able to catch, but place that ball a little bit better, make it easier for your receiver to just catch it and stay running right into a touchdown right there. So I do like Sam Howell, and I think he is, I think there is still a future with him, and I think there is like a lot of upside still to be had with him. But I am disappointed he hasn't been able to correct the throwing the ball away better. He just continues to take these sacks, and each week in his press conferences he acknowledges that and says he needs to correct it, but have yet to see that correction. So that does concern me as well. But he is still the guy moving forward for me.
So that topic of obviously some differing opinions as to what Sam Howell's future might be with this team. Obviously, still a lot of season left to go, but if you guys had to point out maybe something that you would say is a bright spot or something that has been a pleasant surprise about this team through roughly a third of the season, if you guys had to pick your brightest spot, what would you say that would be?
I think Deron Payne is just proving that we made the right decision in paying him. I think he's been, if you could pick one defensive, MVP for our season so far. I mean, there's not really that many names that come to mind. I would say probably Deron Payne. He continues to be an impact player for us, and although maybe a dumb move to questionably fake an injury right there at the end of this game and screw us over on the clock. I don't know if he was told to do that. Don't know if he did that on his own. I'm not sure if we'll ever find out. But overall, I think he's been a really good impact player for us and showing that was the right decision to give him a big deal. Um, Other bright spots. I mean, I think we've had some decent guys, depth that's shown up here and there that has given us a little bit of confidence. I mean, I think guys like Chris Rodriguez you see today, and I'm not really sure why we're putting him in, but he's looking good when we are doing it. So, I mean, I guess you kind of see that. Obviously, we've benched Emmanuel Forbes and seen him in limited action since that Bears game. Quan Martin actually looks pretty good today. I think Danny Johnson. You see a couple of our kind of mid-level guys, stepping up and doing their job or doing a decent enough job in filling in some roles, but there's really not a lot to get excited about with this team. It seems like every week we come out and it's a Jekyll and Hyde situation. What are you going to get? What kind of team are you going to get? How are we feeling? We feeling like playing like ourselves, like and what we're capable of, or are we going to lay an egg? I don't know.
Yeah, I do somewhat agree with you there, Chris, that there's not much. Not a surprising one, more just a nice to see that they're living up to it. Is our defensive line across the board is looking rather like its old self, I guess, or as we expected it to look at one point. I mean, you have Montez Sweat and Jonathan Allen both having 5 sacks on the season. Jonathan Allen has 3 on the season. They're all playing quite well along that defensive line, which is nice to see. I know that there was definitely some production issues for Chase Young last year with the injury and everything, and the questions of whether we'd bring him back. And it's good to see that he's performing up to his standard again. Um, as for the offensive side of the ball, I'd say the biggest bright spot has to be Brian Robinson, just looking like a guy that I think we all kind of wanted him to be. I mean, he had 3 rushing touchdowns on the season going into this game. I believe he leaves with just one. Yeah, he has our 1 rushing touchdown from the game today. And he also has 2 receiving TDs on the year. So he has been an absolute bright spot on an offense that has been somewhat questionable. Um, it's hard to watch these games sometimes, and that's just how it is going to be for the time being. Um, but otherwise, I mean, I think that there hasn't been many other bright spots to talk about, sadly.
You could mention Jamison Crowder if you're thinking about the special team side of the ball. As a
True.
guy that he's been able to come in and have a couple nice punt returns for us so far. I'm in favor of putting him back to return kicks as well. I don't see why they don't do that um, they should use him there, as well. It seems like he's still got a little juice left. It's kind of fun to have him back in the burgundy and gold. So that's been a little fun to watch. Again, it's not going to really move the needle for us, but a big play here or there could really help us in an individual game, as it did last week. So I'd say that that's a bright spot if we're trying to look at all facets, offense, defense, special teams.
Absolutely. And it is nice to have him around for the nostalgia factor. Always good to see an old face back in the burgundy and gold. And I am going to have to agree kind of with Tom on both of those points. Honestly, on the offensive side of the ball, Brian Robinson is, turning out to be a guy that can give you production when you put the ball in his hands. And, honestly, I was really frustrated at the end of the game when we weren't just giving him the ball up the middle. There's a couple of times where I thought they could have been, when we need a yard or so, just give him the ball, and let him use his strength to get a couple extra yards. And on the defensive side, I would say, obviously the whole defensive line, but our two edge rushers as well, and Sweat and Young, have both been productive. But that would kind of lend me into another burning question with this team. Of course, both of them are on expiring deals this year. Third of the way through, they're both performing well. How do you guys sit on the contract situation with those two? And of course, there's actually been rumors that they would be open to fielding trade calls for both of those guys. So what do you think about, everything looming with our edge rushers?
Unpopular opinion here, potentially. As much as I love those guys, I don't know if they're really still ever played at the elite, first round pick status that they were both selected at, particularly Chase Young. Even though he did have a good game today, I will give him credit there. So it's kind of, are either of these guys even worth, a huge contract that they're going to obviously demand? I think you obviously need to retain at least one of them to keep the somewhat continuity and integrity of your defensive line intact. Even though we do have some of our depth, that's one of our strongest depth points on this team is as an edge rusher. So I think that's the reason you do likely see one of these guys depart, because we think we can fill the gap, and also financially it'd be really tough to keep both of them. It's really tough because you're kind of at a point right now where you need to make that decision. Hey, are we going to move one of these guys on a trade? Because I believe the deadline is week 8, if I'm not mistaken. So, we're right at that kind of cusp point, and kind of decision point. So if I had to guess, I would think that this ownership group and Martin Mayhew, they're not the biggest splashy move kind of guys. I would be kind of surprised. I truly would be surprised to see us make a move and trade either of them. I think what they're going to do, and I think what the plan was all along, quite frankly, was to see how each of them do over the course of the season, both from a performance and a durability perspective, and make the decision based off of that. I think Montez comes into this discussion with a slight edge, just given his availability and better production over the last couple of seasons. But Chase Young's obviously has that draft pedigree and kind of higher ceiling, like, so to speak, than Montez Sweat. So it'll be really interesting to see. I don't think there's a clear decision yet, though, in my eyes.
Yeah, it's hard to say with these guys, especially with Chase being so young and his years on this rookie contract being somewhat hampered by the injuries that seem to be constantly looming around discussions with him. Montez Sweat has certainly played very well and continues to play very well. And for those reasons alone, I kind of hope that we find a way to keep both of them, if at all possible. Somewhat back to Chris's point, though, I think Chase Young's ceiling is just higher, and I feel like he, as a person and a player for this team, has been a point of leadership, of professionalism that may not necessarily surround Montez Sweat. I mean, Sweat tends to be a quieter guy, so to speak. If you don't know about the team, then there's a good likelihood you don't know about him. However, that doesn't diminish what he does for us. I mean, he's a valuable player, so it's hard to say which one to keep. But if it's possible to keep both, I would argue that whatever it takes to keep both should happen. And there's certainly a lot of changes which will be made to this team, both in the recent future and in the more distant future, that hopefully will lead to us winning more. So yeah, it's a tough line to draw between the two when you're trying to choose.
Indeed, there are going to be some questions moving forward, as you say. And I think the biggest one has to be the coaching staff here in Washington. Most notably, Ron Rivera, now in his fourth season with the team, 3-4 through the first 7 games. I believe he would be needing a contract extension after this season, because I believe he signed a 4-year deal initially back at the end of the 2019 season. So, moving forward, first of all, just can we talk about overall confidence level with these guys? There's been bright spots on offense and defense. There's been tragedy on both offense and defense. So, what are our thoughts on how this coaching staff is looking after week 7?
Confidence level is unfortunately DEFCON 5, very dire, not high at all. And I don't think I've really been given any reason to feel otherwise with this coaching staff. I mean, I think firstly on the defensive side of the ball, let's start with who I think is our best coach out of I guess the big three, right? Which is Jack Del Rio, in my opinion. And I'm not saying that because I think he's been well. I just think he's been the least egregious out of the three so far. At times, he's been very slow to make adjustments, especially mid game or earlier in the game when they need to be made. I think we need to, for instance, I think he's done occasionally a good job of making adjustments. For instance, last week when we did switch to the 5-man front and it did help us a lot in that game. He needs to be doing a better job of that. When guys are getting beat and our secondary is getting cut up on multiple drives back to back, there's something wrong and there's something that needs to be corrected. So he needs to be doing a better job of making those adjustments quicker and not being so stuck in his ways. I think his job still just is the most secure at this point. But again, I think if you see Ron go, anything's on the table. A whole restaff, clean house is definitely on the table, particularly if the season continues along as it is with just shaky win, devastating loss, shaky win, tough loss, another devastating, if it continues on that trend, I think everyone will go. And then on the offensive side, I think I mentioned it earlier. I'm not sold on Bieniemy being, our savior and this offensive minded genius that has come to Washington that comes from, Super Bowl caliber pedigree. Um, I've been not impressed with him in his press conferences, how he answers questions when criticized on how things have been going throughout the season. I question if he knows what he's really doing, and if he's able to make adjustments based on what is happening in the game as well. And the play calling just hasn't been as electric or as kind of I guess catered to what the needs of the game at that current time are, as I would have expected them to be. So, I'm grading him very, at kind of a C level. I would grade, I guess Del Rio, I'm also giving a C, and I'm giving Ron a D. I think he just hasn't been the best in terms of overall leadership for this team. He seems lost kind of up there. He seems like a deer in the headlights a lot of times with not even understanding why his team is losing. And again, I mentioned earlier, not being able to pinpoint the issues that they're having, or when they are pinpointing the issues that they're having, not seeming to correct them from week to week. So overall, very confidence levels low. And I hope it gets better. Again, I know I've said that earlier. I hope it improves. We'll see.
Ron Rivera did actually show a little bit of emotion in today's game on that call on Sam Howell that the officials ruled was intentional grounding. So he would really actually showed some passion on the sideline, albeit for a call that did not go in our favor, and I don't think was that close to going in our favor. But Tom, we'll go to you and see what you have to say about this topic.
Yeah, it's hard because I want to say that Jack Del Rio is our best coach, but then we have these games where we'll just lose by 35 or 40 and the defense looks porous as all get out. And to some extent, it has to be partially to blame on the players on the field for not necessarily doing their assignments correctly and whatnot. Um, but Jack Del Rio has certainly at least done enough to keep his job, if not the talent doing it for him. And I certainly do like him as a coach. I think that he's not a bad defensive coordinator, and that we've definitely had our struggles with talent outside of the defensive line and acquisition of talent and key skill positions in the defense. As for Bieniemy, I've come to somewhat understand why Andy Reid wouldn't give him full play calling responsibilities as the offensive coordinator. Now, obviously, that's partially because Andy Reid is one of the best offensive minds in the league, if not the best. Uh, but Bieniemy seems to be trying to prove a point with his play calling. You see that with the high amount of pass attempts that we have every game, especially with the guy who's stepping into his first year at quarterback like Howell is. That's not necessarily a great idea, especially because the run kind of alleviates some of that pressure and maybe allows you to set up those passing plays. So Howell hasn't played extremely terrible, but Bieniemy hasn't given him the tools to succeed, in my opinion. So I'm not too hopeful on Bieniemy as of right now. As for Rivera, it's long documented that I don't necessarily like the way that he coaches the team. I think that outside of what happens on the field, he puts his foot in his mouth a lot of times when he's talking to press, which is not a great thing for a leader to do. He micromanages on and off the field, which is once again not a great thing for your head coach, especially when you have a team that's somewhat not unified in terms of I think where they see themselves. And I don't see Rivera as a guy that's going to be around for much longer if the results continue to be what they are. I mean, 500 is kind of like our joke. It's like, oh damn, how do we get to 500 this year? And we certainly are seeming to be able to find a way to do that again this year if all goes wrong, shall we say? Because I feel like this team has a much higher ceiling than it's reaching currently.
I think that the writing has been on the wall for Ron Rivera since the moment Josh Harris and his group of owners took over, because this is I guess you could kind of describe it as like a lame duck coach in a way. He knows that if he wasn't going, to the playoffs and making a run this year, that he most likely probably wasn't going to be around, because the new ownership is going to want to get their people in place rather than starting with the mess that Dan Snyder left. And let's not forget as well that Bieniemy was hired and brought into this team before the ownership change occurred. I know many have been billing Bieniemy as the heir apparent to, Ron Rivera here and going to be the next coach, but he wasn't brought in by this ownership group. That was before any of that happened. So,
Very good point.
really anything is on the table. At the end of this season, depending on how the team finishes, and if the team keeps going on this trajectory, it's going to be another kind of close to 500, 7-win possibly, team. So that's what I would say in terms of the coaching situation. So I wouldn't necessarily say that Bieniemy is lined up to be the next head coach. And with that being said, we can kind of talk about how we think the rest of this season is going to go. Now with 7 games down and 10 left to go in an 18 week, 17 game season. We already talked about the Eagles being up next, but some other opponents looking ahead in the short term would include the Patriots, Seahawks, Giants again, and Dallas on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I would just, I don't, again, I think we said it earlier, I'm not too confident for the rest of the season. And my expectations are absolutely tempered from where they were heading into the season. A couple things I would like to see. I would like to see our run game improve. I think that's an area where, you know, considering our pass protection issues is somewhere we should focus on more. I'd like to see more usage of
Brian Robinson. Even though we've definitely seen a good bit so far, I'd like to see more usage of him. And I'd like to see more usage out of Gibson. I mean, I think we need to. We saw a little dish screen or short pass to Gibson. He picks up a lot of yardage after the fact. That's the second week in a row I think we've seen something like that out of him. I think we need to be doing a lot more of that, getting him in the short passing game, kind of trick play game. Why aren't we doing more of that? It just continues to blow my mind. And then I'd like to see more of our receivers getting work. I mean, I know it's hard when you don't have any time, and Sam just is dropping back and being immediately pressured and taking these sacks. So I don't really know, but I'd like to see improvement in both of those areas and see more usage out of those guys, and as well as Logan Thomas. I think every time we've been able to get the ball in his hands, he picks up a couple extra yards for us. Why aren't we utilizing him more? Just like the offense in Kansas City is with Travis Kelce. Now I'm not saying Logan Thomas is Travis Kelce by any means, but why aren't we utilizing our tight ends more? Not only Logan Thomas but the whole room. So again, I'd like to see the offense expand into that area a little bit more and take advantage of some of those big bodies and guys that we have in that room. I don't know about you guys. What are you guys looking to see?
I think it's a lot of the same that you just mentioned, Chris. I definitely think that the run game needs to be improved somehow, whether that's just calling more plays for them in general, or whether that's, trying to do a conscious sort of thing where we are alleviating the pressure of Howell having to throw all this much during games through running the ball, on first down maybe or second down and we
Right.
have a few yards. Like there was a 2nd and 7 this game, and I believe we went for a pass on the very next play. And I'm like, that's a perfect down to run it on. You can shorten the distance to gain, and you can create more sort of opportunities for your passing game through having the defense worry about it. Now, obviously, today's game, they were playing a lot of zero coverage, which means that they were blitzing. And it's hard to get a run off it through that sort of environment. But quite honestly, when the passing game's not working like it should, and like it didn't in that game, you should be looking towards the run game to at least give them a different look or give us an opportunity to succeed. One of the big things for me that I do want to see is I want to see the young guys step up more. I think that a lot of our younger guys, Emmanuel Forbes, Quan Martin, Chris Rodriguez, a lot of these younger guys getting opportunities to kind of learn, develop, and show what they can do in the upcoming years, because they are going to be the future of this team. And guys like Logan Thomas, who I mean, I think we're all pretty sick of him. And he had a great catch today, but he if he had just stayed on his feet, he would have made it for 25 to 30 yards rather than like the 12 that he got. I really want to see the coaching staff give an opportunity to these young guys and really focus on their development rather than the team's success as a whole being their main focus. I think that that's too broad of a goal for them to be trying to attack. I think that they got to look for incremental steps that lead them to that goal. So that's the two things for me.
Yeah, and for me, I would say it's as simple as this. We're at a point where we've won 3 games and we've proven to be somewhat competitive in games, but then also a team that's susceptible to just fall flat in their face, against bad opponents. So what I think I need to see from this team truly is, I need a little bit more, evidence that Sam Howell can be our guy moving forward, and that this is a guy that we want to invest in for the future, or at least for next season. Because at this point, he's still a very young player. He's shown some flashes, but what's around him, specifically on the offensive line, and a lot of times his defense, can't stay off the field. As we've seen this season, not giving him, time to stay off. So that's what I'm looking for. I need him to keep showing me these positives, because otherwise you go into this off season, if you keep, kind of at this mid pace, you're not going to be in the sweepstakes for a top quarterback in the draft. And then what are you going to do? And then we're at the same spot that we could traditionally have been finding ourselves in the Rivera era. So that's what I need to see. Is I need to see if Sam Howell is a guy that we truly think we can, maybe build up the offensive line some more and invest in for the future. All right, fellas. Well, some great talk on kind of how the state of the Washington Commanders is looking. And we're going to kind of trail off on a more lighthearted note to end today's episode, talking about free agent GOATs. As many of you know that have listened to this show, we are all big fans and we love talking about the history and maybe some of the more obscure history, as all three of us are very diehard, big stats guys, of course. So we're talking free agent GOATs, players that have been signed to this Washington franchise via free agency. We're each going to provide one free agent GOAT and see who had the best one at the end. The only requirement is that this player played on the team for 3 seasons or less after being signed. So I'll go ahead and start things off here, and going to throw you a name that many of you probably have not thought of for a number of years. It is the strong safety out of San Jose State, undrafted in 2012, first came into the league with the Denver Broncos. It is Duke Iheanacho. Duke Iheanacho played for the team from 2014 to 2016. He was known to be a hard-hitting safety. He was a member of some of those Broncos teams with Peyton Manning that had playoff runs. That's notably the 2013 team that lost in the Super Bowl. So Duke Iheanacho, he played for the majority of his career actually with our team, and at times, was susceptible to make a flashy play.
That's messed up. I have not thought of Duke Iheanacho in a long time, and it surprises me that the majority of his career was with us. But yeah, I mean, wow, that's definitely a player I had not thought of in quite some time. But I do remember him being a relatively heavy hitter. That is true.
He only played for 3 years with us, and then Giants 2017 practice squad. After that, he was out of the league. Tom.
He did seem to start the culture of hard-hitting, strong safeties on our team, especially the short-term guys that like Dante Whitner, who was obviously with us. He's a name that I have not given much thought of until actually very recently. He was a thought that I had as a guy who I thought of, would he still be able to make this team as it is today? And my answer was no, but I think that he's an interesting name for you to bring up. He certainly was not a name that I had thought of for this, but I'd like to throw you guys an option at least. The guy that I think we don't talk about enough in terms of his career with the then Redskins. I think Deshaun Jackson has a case for being one of our best free agents we've ever brought in. If you look at his stats, he had 2,000-yard seasons with us, both to start and end his career with the Redskins. He had a rough middle of 528 yards, but he really spent what might be considered his prime years athletically with the team. And you saw him bounce around after that a little bit, but he really played outstandingly well, to the point where the idea of GOAT free agent is certainly one that's not said in jest. However, I will say that my backup for this, in case we did not, one of you decided to steal him, I didn't have the opportunity to say him in time, was going to be Silas Redd, who I do not believe was drafted by the team. However, had a great career of being someone that us fans who are serious fans of the team will remember and love for probably the rest of our lives.
Hell yeah, Silas Redd shout out. Always a big fan of those. Yeah, Djax, that's a good choice. I mean, especially because we got a lot of production out of him in the short time that he was here. Alongside Pierre Garçon, kind of a really good compliment to him, and Jamison Crowder, I believe as well, who funny enough is now back with us and actually still being somewhat productive. So that is a great choice, and kind of back to the Duke Iheanacho conversation. We actually there was a point where we really did have a lot of instability with that safety position on this team. It's a good point. I think that you guys raise. Deshaun Goldson, DJ Swearinger, Brandon Merriweather. You mentioned Dante Whitner being on the squad at one point. We really have played around with a lot of free agents, over the years back there. Monte Nicholson, even though he was homegrown, toyed around with him as well. So it's good to see that we have a little bit more stability at that position nowadays. But overall, both good choices. My guy that I chose for a random free agent signing, GOAT, rather, it was with us just for 1 year, but he was a starter, and I think started all but one of those games. It was the last season of his NFL career, and a guy who was undrafted to start out of his career coming out of Utah State. I'm talking about Donald Penn. Your boy Donald Penn, very reliable tackle in the NFL. Spent a lot of his career with the Bucks and the Raiders before coming to us for his final NFL season. Started nearly every game, I believe, and was critical piece on that team, the last Redskins season that we had, with Adrian Peterson running behind him as well. So had a lot of old free agent goats at that time that were kind of finishing out their careers in the burgundy and gold as Redskins. So really, really cool to see that. And, I'm sure you guys will like that choice.
Yeah, definitely a lot of different interpretations for the free agent goats section.
Yeah.
We have some fun with it, but Donald Penn, definitely a guy that, after having such a long and successful career like he did, to have one of those guys play a season on your team is always fun. Notably the Adrian Peterson, of course, as you mentioned. Thomas Davis is another one that comes to mind that played just one season for us, kind of in a reserve role. So that is fun to see. He also, for any Madden players out there, he used to get a tight end card every single year because he was always kind of a red zone target.
Yeah.
Back in the day. So any Madden heads out there, he was the GOAT blocking tight end in Madden.
Yeah, and it's important to note that we brought him in after the Trent Williams sort of debacle, if you will. And
Right.
he surprisingly played somewhat now he wasn't amazing. He was about probably 45 going on 70 at that point. I think his
Exceeded
knees had
expectations,
given
though.
out. He exceeded expectations by a mile. So I am happy to hear that someone did remember and shout out the legend Donald Penn. Could have been a Hall of Famer had he stayed with one team. It's a weird opinion to have, but he was really good for many of those years.
Well, out of those three choices, you got Donald Penn, Deshaun Jackson, and of course Duke Iheanacho. Who do we say is our winner?
Well, if we're sticking to, I'd say, GOAT definition, and we're looking at production, I'd say you have to give it to Djax. However, I think there are different interpretations of the random free agent GOAT kind of choice and decision matrix. So I also like the randomness of Duke Iheanacho and kind of the fringe factor there. So that's a tough one. I think I'll give the edge to Djax. But again, I think close overall, and definitely could go a number of ways depending on your kind of evaluation criteria here.
I personally am a big fan of the Duke Iheanacho shout out as well. I will say that I think if we're talking about strict GOAT, sort of terminology and the guy who actually did put in most production, I'd have to agree with Chris that I think my pick of Djax was the best. However, I will say that if we're talking about a guy, maybe he doesn't deserve the shine traditionally, but I think I would give the shine too. Donald Penn as a call out was a name that I think many of us long-term Commanders fans have not thought about since 2018-19 at the very latest. So I will be giving my honorary vote to Donald Penn.
Well, definitely some good responses nonetheless, no matter how you slice it. And that'll take us to our next and final segment of the day. This is going to be stats that exist but don't matter. So interpret that as you will. Stats that exist but don't matter as pertaining to this Washington Commanders franchise, current, all time, you name it. It's stats that exist that don't matter. And with that being said, we will kick it over to Tom first for our first stat that exists that doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, I was trying to, think about where to look for these sort of stats that exist but do not matter. And I think a lot of them honestly have come from this season. Now, a few of the ones that I have here, you can argue that they matter. I would tell you that they really don't in the broad perspective of things. Starting off here, the Commanders as a whole, we tend to see that the breaking point for us is around 21 points scored on the board. Now, when we had scored more than 21 this year, we have a 2-1 record. When we score less than 21, we have a 1-3 record. Does it matter? Not necessarily. Your defense could be playing very well. You score 21 points. The other team might score 7. You could score 14. And the point being, the offensive production doesn't necessarily matter. It's the team game. It's whether the defense you have to back it up does back it up. And I think you see that through the 2-1 record of 21 plus points. Now, another thing that I was trying to look at is, when we win and when we lose, we seem to be doing a lot of passing either way, but is there really a sort of notable difference in the passing attempts that Sam Howell has in winning versus losing games? I have found that in winning games, he averages somewhere around roughly 33.5 passing attempts. In losing games, however, he averages, and this is my rough math here, so forgive me if I'm off by 0.5 or 0.2 or whatever. He averages around 41.8 pass attempts. And this goes back to our point somewhat about running the ball. And does it really matter? No, because if he's completing 75% of those, we're winning. If we miss, 50% of those, we might be losing. So I would argue that those stats exist but do not matter. And one last stat that exists for this team, which I believe does not matter, and which was shouted out on today's broadcast, is Sam Howell is on pace this year to break the single season sacked record, meaning the most times sacked at 92 if the current pace continues. The previous record, 74, set by, I believe, David Carp with the Houston Texans. Does it matter? Not necessarily. Just because he's getting sacked a bunch doesn't mean we're not winning games, as shown by our 3-4 record. Does it exist? Absolutely. Now, I heard Chris has a few more here that I'm actually very interested to hear about. So, Chris, I'll let you take the reins from here.
Yeah, sure thing. And I think that last one you mentioned, Tom, I does it matter? Maybe. I mean, I think it's definitely not a good indication of how poor the O-line performance has been and how porous it seems to be. So overall, that stat is concerning. Whether or not it matters or not, it definitely is concerning to me. And it would be a very Washington football esque situation and occurrence for us to break a record like that and then be the new holder of that record for who knows how long. So let's hope that it doesn't come to that. We really need to see this O-line pull it together a little bit so that we don't become a laughing stock of the NFL when we break that record later this season. But moving on to my random statistics that don't actually matter. The first one, I have one that's current and one that's more historical. The first one, out of today's game, your new, hopefully not, but your new starting Mike linebacker had the most tackles out of anyone on the team today, Mr. David Mayo, with 7 overall tackles. And if that doesn't inspire confidence in you and in this team moving forward, I don't know what will. So overall, that's my current historical fact that does not matter. Again, let's hope that Cody Barton, whatever that injury is, isn't that bad. I'll take him over David Mayo any day of the week. And then going back a little bit, all the way to 2011, for this next fact and statistic that exists but does not matter. Our boy Jabbar Gaffney in 2011 was 53 yards short of a 1,000-yard receiving season. So it just puts it a little bit in perspective about how, like I said earlier, how poor of a season it is for our receivers. Jabbar Gaffney apparently was tearing it up back then, and almost broke the 1K mark. So again, shout out to Jabbar Gaffney, and let's hope that our receiving core can pick it up a little bit and get more on track along the lines of those numbers.
Hearing that name certainly just made my afternoon after watching the product on the field that I saw today against the Giants. Jabbar Gaffney, a fantastic name. Definitely, I don't know that he was brought in. He might have been brought in as a free agent. Therefore, that would qualify him as a free agent GOAT. So, definitely a name. Definitely a name. Yeah, honorable mention. Definitely a name I'm glad to hear. Now, if I had to throw something into the ring here for a stat that exists but doesn't matter, and take it for what you will, whether or not you think this doesn't matter, but I'll explain why I think it doesn't matter. So as it stands right now, 6:18 p.m. on Sunday, some games are still in progress, but as of right now, and after this window, I don't think it'll be particularly close with any of these teams. The Washington Commanders have allowed the most points of any team in the NFC conference. Now, obviously, that might seem like a statistic that would matter, but I really don't think it does. I really don't think it does in the grand scheme of things matter, because if you look at our record, it's not indicative of a team that is going to be getting the first overall pick. And, based off of that fact alone, some of the other teams that are out there, are really making it tough to contend for a top pick in the draft. And with how things are going, I don't envision that being the case, despite the fact that our defense has allowed that many points. So normally you would look at that number and say, whoa, this team is, real. Things must be very, very dire, which obviously had some losses that would say that. But just kind of where the team is at, I don't think that it overly matters too much, whether you're looking at tankathon or you're looking to contend. It's a number that's out there.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that you make, and it almost kind of lends itself to the Panthers statistic, which I heard the other day, which is that the Panthers are the highest scoring team, at least I believe at the time of week 6 in the NFC South, and their current record is 0-6. So you certainly have a case for that being a stat that exists, but does not matter.
Some great stats there to close out our show. Hopefully those last couple of sections brighten the mood after what was, of course, nothing that can be described but a disappointing result today against the New York Giants. So, we'll look ahead to the rest of the season. Eagles next up. We'll be coming back at you guys with more updates throughout this season. But for now, that's all we got. And for all of us at Going Commando, for Tom and Chris and myself, Clark, thank you for tuning in today. And we'll see you next time. As always, HTTC and HTTR.